ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, Matt Petrowski here for ISO FileMaker Magazine. You can always find more content at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at solution-wide popovers. Have you ever found yourself copying the same thing from one layout to the next, Especially popovers. Let's say you have a button bar within that popover. Well, what happens when you change one? Does it affect all the others? No, it does not, but we can solve that with solution-wide popovers. All right, let's go. Thank you for joining me here on my desktop. You can see that we've got a FileMaker file, and if you're watching this video on YouTube and it's freely available, if you like this type of content, you like learning about what you can do in FileMaker, how you can make things easier, then you're going to find a ton more content over at FileMakerMagazine.com. But here's what this video is about. On the screen, I have more or less 3 different popovers. I have one right here, and then I have 2 of them right here. Now, when we click on these, whether I click on this one, or click on this one, they're all somewhat looking the same, except that last one did something a little bit different. In fact, it makes it universal, or solution-wide, as I should say. That's the title of our article. Now, when I click on this one right here, let's talk about the most common problem that you have, or one of the most common problems that you have in FileMaker. I'm going to go into layout mode on this file. And as we zoom in here, this particular popover, it is simply a button that is a popover. You can either use this object right here, or you can use this one, the button bar. Both of them allow you to make a popover. As I click and hold, you can see right here is a popover button. And if I was to add a button bar, this one right here, then I would be able to make any given segment of that button bar a popover. Now, in this case, I am using, let's switch back to the arrow tool, I am using a button bar. We can always see that when we initially select the object and it shows its selection. Then we click a second time. That means we've selected a segment of the button bar. And when I double click, we're going to see that we've got the button bar set up. It comes up. We can see clearly I have set this to a popover button. Now, the first thing we want to recognize about popovers in FileMaker is you can never, ever have more than one popover open at a time. In other words, if I go back into browse mode and I click on this popover, as soon as I travel over to this popover right here, when I click it, because this popover is going to open, the other popover is going to dismiss. You just simply can't have more than one. Now, that leads us down a path that provides some really cool functionality, as we're going to see in the remainder of this video. Back into layout mode, we take a look at this common problem. So in this popover, I have added a button bar. We can see that when we come over here to our inspector, where we've got the 4 areas. We select on this one, the 3rd area, and we can see quite clearly that showing this is a button bar. This is the most common way to see what an object is when we select it if we don't know. For example, if I selected here and I can tell that it's a button bar because of how long it is and the fact that I select a segment. But if I had selected just a single button and didn't know it was a button, this is where we can see in the 3rd area right here. Now, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Well, I have more than one layout in this solution. If we go over here to the layout, and we can see that I've got, let's see, technique specific. So these are the 3 layouts that I have. This one is just what we're going to see is implemented here in this technique. For this, we've got the form and the list view. So I'll switch to the list view. In fact, I can go between layouts with the arrow key if I want to use the control key. In other words, I can go from this layout to this layout. And it's really advantageous when you put layouts next to each other to be able to flop between them using that control arrow key method, because you can see more or less pixel shift. So I can see when I go between these 2, I don't have pixel shift, whereas this was down, let's say it was down by 2 pixels and I didn't notice that. Well, here I can go between the 2. Notice you can get that jump. That's a nice little tip. These are the types of things that you'll get over at FileMakerMagazine.com. So let's put that back up 2, and we'll switch between the 2. I went up 1 a little high. There we go. We're toggling between the 2. So the problem that we have is on this layout, I've just decided that I don't want this to be called special option anymore. I want this to be called special button. Now, if I am using this particular popover in multiple locations, of which I am, when I go over here, of course, it is now not called special button. It is called special option, and I have to go to that previous layout copy that popover, and take it to any other layout where that popover exists. Beyond that, the biggest problem is what happens when I want to modify this and I want to add some new functionality. I'm going to take my little bottom part down here and I'm going to add a new button. I click the plus and I say yet another. I think you get the idea of what's going to happen here. I have to assign this button. I now have a choice and I get to drag this out. I get to make it 44, what I want it to be. Let's drag this. You can see I'm having to make a lot of effort to drag this. I'm looking at the tooltip, trying to guess here. I'm going to drag this back up. I've got a lot. I mean a lot of shuffling to do here. I've got to scroll that up. Is that 2 pixels? No, it's 3 pixels. Is that 2 pixels? There it is. Okay, I've made the change in this one place. Well, now I need to get this over into the other layout. Completely doable, but we want to avoid that. We want to be able to edit things in one place and have those changes be accessible universally. So this particular popover is using the exact same method as this popover right here. And not only that, all of the options shown in the popover, the name of this button, can be edited in one single place. Also, the script that is triggered right now, if I click on option 1, and this is running script H, which in this file, if we take a look at it, I have a folder of all of my dummy scripts, and these are all simple scripts. They're just a script with a single show dialog, and that show dialog, all it's doing is it's taking the name of the script using the get script name right here and showing that as the content of the dialog. So we've got script A through H. So we're using those dummy scripts in order to showcase that no matter where I am, when I make a change, if I click on this and I want this to be special button, like I just did with the other setting, I'm going to edit this in one place. Where am I going to do that? I'm going to open up and go to the Manage Custom Functions. Now functions, that's custom menus, Matt, wrong menu. Let's go to Manage Custom Functions, open the right one. What we're going to see is a number of functions. If you have been working with FileMaker and you are not familiar with custom functions, a custom function does not have to be used for the purpose of a function. It can in fact be used for more than that, but I am going to be able to change this name of this button in one place. Let's go to this popover menu X. We can see that we have a special option right there. I am going to name this special button. Make that one universal change right there. Click OK. It is now called special button here. I switch to my other layout and it is called special button here. I made one change in one place, and every other layout that uses this particular popover has now been updated. And that is because as I use my scroll wheel on my mouse here, you can quite clearly see that this is a portal. Now there's some things that we need to take advantage of that we need to do. One of them is, look at this, we need to indicate to the user that this is actually a scrollable popover. We're going to do that using a fade, and I'm going to show you how. Also, we want to be able to use this one method for an unlimited number of popovers, and that's exactly what this technique does. In other words, when I click here and I get special button, cool script, etc., when I click over here, it's using the exact same method, but it is now showing option 1, option 2, option 3. The trick to this is, and I'm going to show you in the remainder of this video how it's working, is we are simply creating menus in code. So when we look at the distinction here, we've got popover menu X versus popover menu Y. I could have popover menu Z. I can have as many of these as I want. And they don't necessarily have to come from these custom functions. They could, in fact, come from a field if I wanted to have a table of menus and be able to use those solution-wide. But if I go look at this one, what you're going to see and what we're going to cover in the remainder of this video is how this whole solution is working. How is it that we're editing and controlling a menu in one place that universally or solution-wide flows to all of our other popovers, because I no longer want this to be option 1. I want this to be my custom option. and I make that one change, and now any other popover that's using that, which in this case is this one right here, that change is solution-wide. So let's go through all of the details. If you've not worked with FileMaker, I'm going to cover this in depth. If you have worked with FileMaker and you're interested in simply just copying this code, you can go over to FileMakerMagazine.com. And while this video is going to be free, and I'm going to show you how it all works for free, if you'd like to access the file, I simply just ask that you subscribe. The cost of a subscription at FileMaker Magazine is less than what an average junior developer should be charging for an hour of work. And I'm going to save you the time because you can copy and paste the code and you'll be ready to go in no time. So you find yourself asking the question, where should you host your FileMaker solution? Well, one of those dots right there. That's what I would pick. Now, they didn't come to me. I went to them. And I trust fmcloud.fm with all of my data. They are using the latest tech. In fact, did you know Claris is actually in some instances releasing features first and only for Linux? What does fmcloud.fm use? They use Linux. On top of that, they use containerization. And if you've not heard about containerization, then you will be. It's one of the best ways to host your FileMaker solution. I highly suggest that you check out fmcloud.fm. Okay, let's start with the fundamentals of how things are working in FileMaker. We go into layout mode and we go up to the button tool, we select the button tool, we drag out a new button. Now what this comes up with is a setup. Everything about this button hinges on the fact that when you click the button, it's going to do something. That is this selection right here. You're probably already familiar with it. Perform script. Now, if we want to have something perform a script, there's multiple ways that we can perform that script. We can assign it literally right here, or we can abstract this out by passing something to a script, such as a suggestion, or the ID of what script to run. Now, in this video, I'm not going to be able to go over it in depth, but I'm going to show you because I'm using a plugin called the MBS plugin. And the MBS plugin reveals something that's underneath the hood in FileMaker that allows us to identify each one of these scripts by their internal number. And by the way, what happens is that internal number, once it's created and used, it never comes back, even if you clone or duplicate a file within the file system. So, knowing that that is the case, all we want to do is we simply want a list of a name and then the script that's associated to that name. So, when I'm in browse mode and when I click this right here, all I'm doing is I'm showing a name, and then associated to that name is the number of the script that I want to run. In other words, the internal ID. Now, there is one extra that I'm getting with this, and that is the icon right here. And we're going to talk about the icon a little bit later. But knowing those two pieces of information, that's all I really need to know. Is there a script associated to this, and then what is the name? Now, the way that the name is going to be displayed is using what's a technique that's been around for quite a while, but it is very popular and extremely useful. It's called virtual list, but what we need to know is that really, in order to make this happen, in the whole of this solution, when we take a look at my tables, popovers is the one table that we need that allows us to show an unlimited number of portal rows. Now, a portal. I thought that a portal was used in order to show related records. In other words, I'm going to connect here. I'm going to select my child table of what I want to show, and then I'm going to use that portal for that purpose. You can use a portal for anything that you want to display multiple items of. And because you can control what does or doesn't get displayed, that's where you get the greatest amount of control within FileMaker. Remember, we have a hide calculation, and that's going to come into play in this particular situation. So when we look at our popover itself right here, we can see quite clearly when we select this and we go look at that third area. Let me size the window and bring it on screen. We can see that quite clearly it is a portal. So that portal allows us to have one object with one style in one place. And that's it. every other time that this shows, every repetition thereafter is simply going to be the exact same thing. Now, when it comes to the icons, you can see what's going on right here because I have all of these little hide calculations. And we're going to talk about the icons a little bit later, but let's talk about what displays in this particular object right here. Now, a button bar, because it was created after FileMaker buttons, and FileMaker buttons have a history wherein a FileMaker button does not allow for a calculated display. What we're going to do is we are going to use a single segment button bar. So when I double click this and the button bar setup comes up, we can see that it is using a let function. So we've got a calculation for the name of the button, and the script that we're running is popover click. In fact, the whole of this solution, it is so simple, but yet so great. When we bring up these scripts and we take a look at the scripts that you can copy to your own solution for solution-wide or universal popovers, you select this folder, you copy it, you go paste into your solution. Well, you need to copy a couple of custom functions first, which we'll look at. But these two scripts are what makes all of the magic happen. And that's it. So we are going to look at this particular button right here. When we double click, we have the HUD that comes up. We had that calculation. We're going to look at that. And here's how simple it is. We simply need to get a value. That value needs to come from somewhere. Where is it being stored? Well, you could store it in a global field. Personally, I don't like to store things within fields unless those fields are specific to my solution. So you could create a global field, but I personally prefer a global variable. Where in here is there a global variable? We don't see a global variable in here, but there is one being referenced. It's within this custom function right here. Now, what I like to do is I like to abstract. When I have to have something and I'm moving into many different layouts in FileMaker, each one of those layouts is landing on a table occurrence, and that table occurrence may have a completely different context, which means using a global variable really isn't that effective. But using a global field, but using a global variable is global to the whole file, meaning whatever is stored in that variable is accessible to the whole file. So I am designating a global variable called popovers. And quite simply, this custom function, all it's doing is referencing this global variable. If you wanted a different named global variable called, I don't know, something like my.popovers, then you can change that in this one custom function, and then everywhere else that this custom function is referenced, it's using this global variable. It's a much easier way to manage this because if I simply put popovers right here, if I put popovers in this particular place, for all of the other places where I'm referencing it, I simply have to go update that if I'm going to change this technique. You can see that in that, not only is it used on the name, but if we take a look at the hide calculation for the whole object, we can see that it too is referencing popover data. Now, if this again was popovers, I now have to go into multiple places in order to change that. I don't want to have to do that, so I'm going to use a custom function in order to maintain a singular reference to an object that I need to use. Heading into my Manage Custom Functions, we look at the first one of our custom functions, and there it is. Nothing more than a simple reference using a custom function to a global variable. This gives me a singular place where I can now change this to whatever I want. If I now want to store the data in my .popovers, well, all of the rest of my calculation references reference this one custom function, which means I can change the name of this custom function. I can also change the contents of what the custom function returns. So that is the first super valuable tip. It is, you do not have to use custom functions just as functions. You can use them as part of your solution logic. I highly promote it. I love it. It is a great way to go because it is the one place in all of FileMaker where you can have singular code, other than a single table which has your singular code, but this is part of the FileMaker interface. So we're going to see that that is referenced all over the place, that popover data. So when we go back into here and we go and we change this back, we can see that popover data is just simply a reference to that global variable. Now, what's in the global variable, popovers? What's in that is JSON. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at next. This whole technique of using these popovers, it actually comes from a solution that I created called, I forget what I called it, but it's basically you come up to the top of a solution and you click a very common hamburger menu, and then a card window comes from the side, scrolls out, and then shows you a portal, which is using the exact same method that we have in this file in order to show you all of your button options, but it's much more robust. It's got rounded edges, it's got top, it's got solo buttons, middle buttons, much more complex. This is just a simple popover, which is using one single segment button bar, which is showing the name, pulling from that global variable. Well, looking at the global variable, when we show the data viewer, we go to our current tab, I scroll down, we look at popovers, which this is not the best or easiest way to see this, but this was populated based on yet another custom function. But again, it could come from a field in a table if you wanted to. If you wanted to have a table called popover menus, you could reference that. But again, that's tied to your graph. This is why I like to use custom functions, because I can edit it in one place and have it work solution-wide. So what happens is when you click on the popover, I'm going to bring up the data viewer, and we are going to click on this another right here. When we click on this, what we're going to see is that we are triggering an onObjectEnter. That onObjectEnter is on the popover itself. So this popover, which I just highlighted, which says More Tools, that is the script trigger that is tied to this popover. It is running the second of the two scripts, or I should say the first of the two popover scripts. And this is how it works. We set the menu in the parameter itself. The menu is not being set in the script. In other words, each popover determines what items it's going to show at the time that you actually clicked it. So if we take a look at this, let's go ahead and cancel that script right now, and we'll come back to it. Let's go take a look at the popover itself. And I'm going to, you can either command or control click on this object, or you can right click and choose the set script triggers. We set that. We can see that it is quite clearly calling the script that we just saw, popover render, where that popover is going to render itself. But if we look at the script itself, this is where we are setting that object. Now, this is a difficulty because this is sprinkled in multiple different places. Not something that I like per se, something I would probably address. I just didn't think about it when I was implementing this. But what I'm doing is I am setting the global variable that I'm using to store a JSON-based menu, and that JSON-based menu in this particular case is coming from a custom function. And again, as I mentioned, this could come from a related table if you did want to put it into the schema of your relationship graph. But wherever this data comes from, this particular item, it simply needs to be JSON-based data. And I'm using the exact same menu system of JSON that I used in the other technique where I simply show a portal that comes up in a card window. I'm just using it within popovers. But there's one most important feature that I've added to this that isn't in that other technique, and that is the fact that the whole reason that I created this technique was because I needed to be able to have the menu vary based on things within the user interface. In other words, this popover needed to sometimes show 4 items, sometimes show 6 items, and it all depended on what was going on in the user interface. In other words, just like we have right here, where I've got a button bar with multiple segments, let's say, for example, this particular segment called Cool Script, I don't want it to show. Well, if I go and take a look at my hide object, I have access to the hide as a calculation. I want the same thing within my popovers, but I want to be able to not have the popover do funky things, which in this case, watch what happens when I hide this. If you've been a longtime FileMaker developer, you're going to see that when I hide this, which I'm just basically saying, true, you're going to hide this. When I go into browse mode, what happens to a native button bar is all of the rest of the buttons just get bigger. It's not a good look. You lose a lot of your consistency. Let's go and hide this other one too. We've got this one, and we'll set that one to a 1, and we'll take a look. Notice that the buttons keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's because a button bar basically uses the same exact height that it has, or width, and simply just expands the buttons out in order to occupy that. You don't get that with this particular solution, because this particular solution is either going to show that portal row or it's not. And that's what you get, the exact same number of items. You also get to control the order in which they show up. You can vary that if you wanted to reshuffle things based on changes in the UI. There are just so many cool reasons as to why this is a great technique. So let's take a look at the rest of what we need to know, which is how do we use the virtual list and how does that work? If I haven't used that before, you need to know how to use virtual list, because this whole technique hinges on that, and that's what we're going to learn. Then we'll go through and wrap up by taking a look at the scripts and all of their individual steps. It's time that we talk about the virtual list, or the way that we're using the portal in order to show the rows. When I click here, no matter how many items I want to show, the rows of a portal have to be available as related records. Now, what do we need in order to get these? Quite simply, one table with one field and however many records you might show of items within your popovers. So we go into our database, we look at our tables, we look at the popovers table, and we can see that it only has one field and 102 records. In fact, I don't even need 102. If I only had 50 records, it would be fine. Because how many times are you ever going to show more than maybe 10, maybe 20 at the most items within a popover? If you're showing more than 20 items in a popover of all of your possible options, you are confusing your user because you haven't segmented your user interface out into all of its different areas. And so when we take a look at this, the only field that we need, which if you're not familiar with virtual list, you're going to see a lot of different articles out there about virtual list. But in order for a row to show, the only thing we need is the record number. That's it. You can see right here, we have a calculated field called recnum. It could be record number. It could just be num if you wanted to, or number for short. But you can see that it is an indexed field. So this does have to be as a calculation. When we go into this calculation and we go down to the bottom, we click on the storage options. We do not want to see this right here. We cannot have this be checked because the virtual list, or the popovers table, must have an indexed value. Now, the great thing about this is with a record number, you can't mess things up. It's not based on the serial. It's not based on a created serial number. It's not based on the internal get record ID. Record number 1 is always record number 1. As I create a new window and we switch to, we'll go into layout mode. We will select this. We will select the popovers. We'll go into browse mode. We can see that this particular table, quite simply, I meant to do 100 records, but I accidentally hit it two additional times. But actually, it doesn't matter if I deleted half of these records and just create them. Record number 1 is always record number 1, and 2, 3, 4, so on. It can't be any other number. So all we have to do now is on the side of the relationship that's going to relate to these tables is simply have a limit. And if we say we've got 5 items, then what we're going to say is you have to be equal to or less than 5, meaning you're going to include 4, 3, 2, and 1, meaning I'm going to get all of those rows, or just 5 rows. 5 rows. Now, there's two ways that we can do this, and it really depends on how your solution is structured. In FileMaker, when we look at the relationship graph and we go to the relationships, Anytime, and I should get rid of this relationship, by the way, anytime that we have a connection from one table occurrence directly to another table occurrence, one side of the relationship does not have to be stored. But in the sense that if you're creating with the separation model, if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But many times your data file, you're not sprinkling in ancillary fields like this one, limit calc, into your data or into your schema. And so you're typically in your UI file going to use a globals table, and that's going to be more than one table away. So in other words, I would have a table in between where these are connected right here, and my control field, the field that's controlling the limit, is in this table. I'm on this table occurrence right here. I'm having to use a control value. Now, I can't use a control value that's calculated in this that looks over, especially if this is a global table with only one record in it, where it looks over into my other table for my popovers. So the reason that this has got two fields right here, one is limit and the other one is calc, is so that I can explain this. If you are using a data separation or you've got a situation where you're more than one table away, many times you need to literally set a field. There has to be a field with a value that relates to this other table occurrence where it's more than one away. But in this scenario, what we're dealing with is we are dealing with the fact that it's a direct connection. We can use a calculated value that's simply going to look at the JSON. It's going to say, how many individual items in my JSON do I have? And that's what I need. If I have 5, remember it's going to go to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's going to include all of those because of this connection right here. Over in Popovers, when we look at this, whatever this number says, as long as the number is less than or equal to that, over here, I'm simply going to show a portal row. There's nothing on that portal that I want to show from a data standpoint. All I want is the portal row to show so that I can present what I want, and then I get to do what I want with what I present using a hide calculation. So let's go ahead and discard all of that. So when I click on this, what happens is that limit calc, if we take a look at it in the data viewer and we go create a watch variable and we actually show what the limit calc has, we'll go ahead and turn on the automatically evaluate. You can see that it has 5 items. Well, where is it getting those five items? Let's take a look at it by doing a JSON format elements. Let's look at our popover data. We know that's referencing a global variable. We can see right here that it's referencing all of these individual items. What is that limit calc doing? Well, we have another function that we can use called JSON list keys. What JSON do we want? Do we want the popover data? What index do we want? We want the whole root. We can see that it starts with 0. If we simply just wrap that with value count, and we put that in, we can see that we're getting the 5 items. So this is what creates our relationship right here. When we look at the relationship, all we have to do is say this calculation is calculating how many JSON items are there, looks over into this portal or into this table, which only has the record number, and that's it. And it's always going to be exactly the same. And it's going to show you those 5 portal rows. Once you've got those 5 rows, what is shown here is simply just going to reference that same JSON data. We already saw that. The name is simply pulling from the name. But on top of that, we've got some additional options. We have the ability to control the visibility within our UI. And all of it hinges on, what do you consider a menu item? So let's take a look at that. We are finally at the point where we can look at the menu itself and where and how it's generated. I've already shown you the menu in the Manage Custom Functions where we have Popover Menu X versus Popover Menu Y. Now, in order to create these menus, it's really pretty simple and straightforward, as you're going to see. And they all hinge on this custom function right here called Menu Item. Menu item, as we double click, is simply what we call boilerplate or template code. This is a JSON object where we are saying JSON set element. We want to set an object. An object is the curly braces. An array is the square brackets. So this object has a number of attributes or key value pairs. What are the keys? Well, in this particular case, you can see that we've got a fair amount of them. But don't be confused by that. A lot of these are used in my other technique where I show the full-blown menu that comes up on a card window. In this particular implementation, there's only two values that we're using. One of them is language, which is broken down into supporting different languages. I wanted this to be multilingual. I could have simply just put name, or I could have put display name if I want to. Now, one thing I want to caution you about, the difference between name, and between display name really starts to add up. When you have 50 of these values, that's a lot higher character count than 50 just simple ins. But in is a lot more difficult. I have to know that in stands for name, but with a single character, I only have 50 characters instead of display name, however many characters it has, replicated 50 different times. Always think about the implications of what you're doing when you put your code into your FileMaker solution. So in this case, we are referencing lang, which is short for language, the English version, and then I'm going to have a menu value. And the only other thing that we're using in this, well, I should say three of the things we're using in here, are the language, which is the display name, the script, which is what script do we want to run, and the parameter of that script. And yes, you can pass JSON within this in terms of your parameters. There is one fourth variable that we have here that is not actually included as part of the template, but I've commented it right here. Remember, with JSON, you can always add to or take away from that JSON. In this particular case, if I'm generating a menu that's going to have, let's say, 100 different items, I don't need to have a lot of these on here every single time. It just makes the JSON much bigger. Now, because I'm dual purposing or using this in multiple places, and in most cases, most of these are used when I'm using it in the context of a card window, but here for a popover, I'm going to suffer the fact that since I'm never generating a popover menu that has more than 20 items, it's really not that big of a deal. When we look at the data viewer and we go in and we actually say, what is a menu item? It's simply going to return our boilerplate code. So all we have to do to generate a new item is simply say JSON set element. And instead of setting a new element, what we're going to do is we are going to set our boilerplate of a menu item. What are we going to set onto that? Well, we can say the script value is going to be a value of whatever ID of a script we want to run. Let's say it's script number 15. And in this case, our type is a JSON number. And you can see that what we get as a result, and if we want to see this, we're going to do JSON format elements. I'm going to hit a return on this and put it in the middle so that I can very conveniently here comment this out if I don't want to see it. I want to see it in its collapsed format, but then I need to be able to read it. I'll take those off. I can actually scroll through this and see that I've got script number 15. So what do I need to do in order to set the name if I was setting this? Well, let's go take a look at the custom function and see how this is set up, because that's where all of it is set up as a full menu to be rendered. We go into our Manage Custom Functions. We go to Menu X. We look at this menu, and all this is code that's defining a large chunk of JSON in a particular order of menu items. And you can see right here, menu item number 1, menu item number 2. Now, all of these menu items, these 4, do not have to be in the order that I want them to be presented. That's controlled in a different place down lower in the code. But what is important is the script internal number. It has to be correct, such that when I click on a particular portal row, what's going to happen is we're going to know what row is clicked, and then we're simply going to reference the JSON and say, what script number do you want to run? And that's exactly what happens. The order, as we can see, is controlled down here in this variable called menu. This is where we have all of our menu items, and it is right here where we are defining the order in which these items appear. And I highly suggest that you simply just name these according to whatever the menu is or whatever the script does or whatever the area of your FileMaker solution is. Let's say, for example, this one would be called Run Awesome. So if I had made that change, all I have to do is change that right here. That was script D. I make that change, and it's just in those two places. If I want this to be up at the top or be my first script, I simply just put that in as the first script. I'm presuming that's only two places I needed to do this. When I select this menu, we can see that Awesome Sauce is now up at the top simply because of that one change in that one place in that one custom function. So not only do I define my menu for this particular popover menu, which can be used solution-wide, the whole purpose of this solution, but now when I click this, if I wanted it to be a different script, which in this case it is script D, all I have to do is change it into one place. I go to my scripts. With the Monkey Bread plugin, we can always see that these IDs are here. You're going to have to look up the way the internal IDs work, but I do have the custom functions in here. The only one we're using is this one right here, these object script ID and object script name. You can look at those in your own time, but let's say I want that to run script number 29. I simply go into my menu here, and I want Awesome to run not 23, 29. I change it in one place only, and now universally, solution-wide, when I click this, it's going to run that script. Well, the popover was still open. I need to open it. One thing that you should note is that switched from D to F now. Notice that the icon just disappeared. So that's where we're going to get into the icon. It's the last part of this whole solution. We know that these popovers are now, each button is simply referencing what it needs to reference out of the JSON in the popover. So everything is stored in this JSON right here, the script, the parameter, the name, all of it. All we need to do now is to tie the icons. And the icons is the only thing that we need to manage manually that would require us to paste. If we adjust this and we add new icons or change icons, we now have to go to all of the different layouts and repaste this whole popover. And that's just one of the downsides. But if you anticipate well, then you probably won't have to do that. Okay, so let's just go through the last pieces that we need to know in order to make this work wherever we're going to take it into all of our other solutions, and that is the icons, and also the fact that we need to indicate to the user that there may be more items than they can see. Let's address that first, that latter one. This right here, when I select it and go over to the settings right here, we'll bring this all the way on screen. You can see that it's using a gradient. This is just a simple hack that you can use anytime that you have a portal that you've got more items that the user should be aware of. And it is simply this. You can resize this however much you need. And notice as I resize it, the fade is taking over the text, which is showing what the portal is, that word popovers 1.4. All you have to do is simply make sure that you're going to overlay an object with some type of translucency to an opacity where it's opaque, and that's what we've got right here. So I've got solid right here, I've got solid right here, and then from this point, the midpoint all the way up, it goes to completely transparent. Anytime that I have a button underneath that, then that button is simply going to be faded out, and the user now knows that, oh, I can scroll beyond this. As soon as they start to scroll, then they can just keep scrolling until they hit the bottom of the list. Which, speaking of the bottom of the list, if I don't anticipate the fact that when this portal shows that the portal can scroll beyond the last item, then what would happen is, because this portal is only showing 4 items and I have exactly 4 items, I would be stuck with this look right here. So this fade, while I can trigger this, it's really not aesthetically pleasing. So the solution to this is within the script, when we render the menu, which we will see right now, we'll bring up the debugger. We will put this off to the side. We will click on the menu. We can see that it's the menu right there is triggering an onObjectEnter. That onObjectEnter is doing a number of things. We'll go ahead and step through it. First, it is not allowing the user to abort. It is capturing the parameter. What is the value that's coming in as a parameter? Well, if we take a look at object using our data viewer, that is simply going to be the object that we want to refresh. In this particular case, it is the portal, because the portal is going to vary. If I click on one popover and it has 7 items, and another popover is only going to show 4, we want to make sure that that portal is actually going to be updated. Actually, it really doesn't need to be done. You could take this off because of the fact that a portal, when you're going from one portal to a completely different portal, FileMaker has to draw that portal anyway. But sometimes you have things inside the portal where it dictates, it's a pretty good idea to go ahead and render that, or refresh it. So we need to get a count of the items. The reason we need a count of the items is because of that fact where I mentioned that we have 2 ways that we could implement these popovers. We could do it if we have a direct connection. It's automatically calculated for us using a calculated field, which is unstored, looking at an index field, which is stored in our popovers table. In this particular case, you can see that the set field is disabled. This is if I was using that global data separation model where I do need to actually set a global field in the globals table so that the portal will actually render. That's when I need this menu count item. Otherwise, this step is not actually needed if this step is not being used and I'm directly connected. You can reduce the script even more and just have this one. But what this one step is doing right here is adding the additional item. You can see that when we double click right here and it brings up our script behind the scenes, and we double click right here, we can actually go look at the logic of what's happening, and we can see that we are simply saying we want to add to the menu count. So I am actually using the menu count, but I could put it within this script. I could reduce by 1 script step and put the logic in this calculation code if I was only ever using a direct connection. But we can see that we are setting the popovers. Here again is another sprinkling of a global variable. I wish we could set via a custom function. It'd be great. That we are going to increment this by 1. So we are adding on an empty menu item. It's right here. We've got an empty menu item, and we are clearing the language. In this case, the value or the key that's going to be used for display, we're setting it to nothing. Now we can use that in our hide conditions if we want to hide certain things. But the way that I'm hiding things, as we're going to see with the icons and the button itself, I'm doing it based on whether or not there is a script to execute. Remember at the very beginning of the video, I told you everything hinges on a button being able to execute if it has a script. If you don't have a script, or if the script is set to 0, then there's no reason to show the button because nothing would ever happen. So we are appending an additional item, which makes the portal longer so that when we scroll past the fade. The only other thing that we need to actually do is look at the icon, and then we're going to close this video out. So as I step through this, that just added the extra item. This is taking the inbound object. It's refreshing that portal if the portal does need to get updated. We are also going to go to that object, and we are going to reset the portal. The reason for these 2 steps, these last 2 steps, if you don't know, within FileMaker, as I put that away, the debugger, we hide the data viewer. The reason is when this popover comes up, if I go to another popover and I come back to this popover, what's really nice is you get to choose. This, if I had 10 items, if I had scrolled to the 10th item, just because this is within a popover does not mean that it would reset. I could come over to this popover, do whatever, and then when I come back, the portal will still be at the 10th item. If you want this portal to reset up to the top, it's those last 2 steps that are actually causing that. So in our popover render, these 2 steps are the steps that are saying, just go back up to the top, just because I left this popover and came back in. So if you like the fact that the user could scroll to another item and maybe it's a particular thing that they're doing where you want to stay at the bottom, you're going to turn those bottom 2 steps off. So the icon, remember, everything hinges on that script. So when we go into layout mode and we take a look at this popover, and the reason that it went away was the fact that I had changed the script from script ID 23 to script ID 29. So the easiest way to deal with this is to simply just size this out. You can see that I have many more icons than I'm showing items. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of anticipating that I'm going to potentially have maybe this many icons, but I don't have to have, I could just have just the 4. I can select this segment, and basically delete all of these segments. But in essence, the visibility of a given icon simply uses the same logic across all of these and only changes by the ID value of the script that you have assigned within the menu. So we select this. We're going to look at the hide calculation by going over to the 4th area. We look at that hide calculation, and we can see right here that this particular item right here is going to hide, or it's going to show only when and if its script value is equal to 15. So in other words, we reverse the logic, which in this case it's saying you need to hide yourself if you do not equal 15. So this is how we basically deal with each of these icons. You put icons in as many of these as you want. Now, could you do icons in a different way? You absolutely can. In fact, if you wanted to have extreme variability, you can put a container field right here. And that container field could render an object that actually comes from text where you have base 64 encoded a particular graphic. Now, unfortunately, with containers, you can't base 64 encode an SVG, which is vector-based, which works really well across all of your devices because of multiple screen resolutions. But in essence, there's multiple ways that we can deal with an icon. For me, knowing that I'm rarely, if ever, going to show more than 20 items in a popover menu, I'm just fine having 20 individual repetitions of a button bar, being able to change the icons to whatever I want them to be, and then hiding and showing those icons based on the internal ID of the script associated to that particular menu item. And with that, it leaves us at our final option, and that is, or our final setting, when we are going to have one extra row. On that last row, we don't want anything to show. So in most cases, that script, which the menu item defaults to a script of 0, when we look at the actual button itself, we can see that it is hiding based on script. And in this particular case, if the script is equal to 0, we are going to hide. If you don't have a script to run, there is no reason in showing you. And the same thing applies to the whole of this icon bar. If we look at the hide for that, same thing. If you're equal to 0, you're not going to show. No icon, no button, nothing. It's just the extra row to scroll past the fade. So what do we have in terms of the click? Well, the click is simply running the second script, which is popover click. If we take a look at that script, we can see that it is super simple as well. In fact, this is the exact same script that I use on my menu system. It simply takes an inbound value. What is that inbound value? The script parameter that we are passing is so simple. It is simply, when we double click and look at the button itself, the getActiveRow. The getActiveRow simply matches the number that is the getRecord number in the popovers table, which matches the number 1 item in the JSON array. Actually, it's 0 base. So by simply just reducing it by 1, it's all just 1 for 1. Portal row matches record 1. Portal row 1 matches row 1 in the portals table, which matches row item 0, which is basically 1 minus 0, 1 minus 1 equals 0, in order to get exactly what we need. So if that didn't make sense, we can take a look at the script. We can see that when the script comes in on the popover click, actually I had that up, but we'll go to it right here. There it is, -1. So if row 1 comes in, this is now going to get item 0 in the JSON array. And we can see all we need to pop off is what's the script, what's the parameter. We are going to then run those. I also have this really nice feature called eval. So if you did not see it, when we're looking at the data viewer, and just because I want to be thorough for you so that you know all of the things that you can do. When we look at JSON format elements and we look at a menu item right here, one of the items that I have in here is called eval. And as long as we're within our own FileMaker universe and we're not exposing something where a user can use eval, we can put a legit FileMaker calculation right within this and evaluate that as part of the click when the user clicks that particular item. So this is the way the script works. You click on the actual button, that takes in the row. The row corresponds to the JSON object that you want. It's extracted right there. We pull off the script, the parameter. We can evaluate, which can establish, say, any global variables if you need those to be in place, or any other calculation based on context. Then if we do have a valid ID, we are simply going to run that script right here according to the name that we got. So we're simply taking the ID of 15, whatever it means, turning it into the name, passing the name to the perform script by name. It runs the script. Everything is in place for us to run, and we've got a universal popover solution. In order for me to get this button bar to be super small, all I have to remember is I am simply using a width of 44. Scroll it out, set up all your icons, shrink it down. If you do make icon changes, unfortunately, you do have to select this object, copy it, and take it over to all of your other layouts where this particular popover menu is being used. All right, so there you have it. There is solution-wide popovers. No more of this where I select on this, oh, this is not what matches over in this. But yet, with solution-wide popovers, we get the ability to control in one place, one custom function, the fact that this menu is going to be exactly the same unless I have simply copied the wrong menu. And even then, it's super easy to copy and paste. I'm going to leave you with this follow-up tip if you're not already familiar with it. If I do need to copy and paste that, watch how easy it is. Many times FileMaker remembers the last click location, but if I want this menu over in the other layout, I'm going to copy it, use my control arrow, come over here to delete this. Now, before I paste, I'm going to go into, and this is, I don't know why it is like this, but I'm going to go into browse mode, go into layout mode. Now FileMaker does not have anything it knows about the layout, and if I paste it, it goes into the exact same place as when I copied it on the previous layout. It's just that little nuance. Otherwise, FileMaker will paste wherever you click. If I click right here and I hit Command Control V, it goes right in that location. But if I want it in the exact same place from a previous layout, copy it, and for some reason go into browse mode, come back into layout mode on the layout you've switched to, and then paste. So as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development. If you'd like more videos like this one, head over to FileMakerMagazine.com. So until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.FileMakerMagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.